In the cold winter of December 1542, a cry echoed through the stone walls of Linlithgow Palace in Scotland. A newborn baby girl had just entered the world. Her name was Mary Stuart. Within a week, her father, King James V of Scotland, was dead. The tiny infant, not yet able to speak, not yet able to walk, had become the Queen of Scotland. Imagine it. A baby, swaddled in silk, placed upon a throne that would one day devour her. Scotland, a land of clans, chaos and blood feuds, had placed its crown on the head of a child. And from that moment on, Mary's life would never belong to her. It would belong to the ambitions of nations, the whispers of courtiers, and the sharp edges of betrayal. As she lay in her cradle, rival nobles already plotted. France looked at her as a pawn, England saw her as a threat, and Scotland itself, fractured and rebellious, waited to tear her apart. But destiny had plans far greater than the cradle. This little girl would grow into one of history's most captivating figures, loved for her beauty, despised for her choices, and remembered forever as the queen who lost everything, her crown, her freedom, and her life. At the age of 5, Mary was torn away from her homeland. To protect her from English plots, she was sent across the sea to France. And there, she found herself in a dazzling new world. The French court was the most glamorous in Europe, filled with golden halls, masked balls, and the intoxicating scent of power. Mary wasn't just a guest. She was raised alongside the young Dauphin, Francis, heir to the French throne. From the very beginning, she was adored. Writers praised her as tall, graceful, and striking. She learned languages, French, Latin, Spanish, and Italian. She studied music, poetry, and philosophy. Unlike many queens of her age, Mary was not just a figurehead. She was intelligent, educated, and dangerously charismatic. But behind the music and laughter, shadows stirred. Every lesson she learned, every gown she wore, was preparation. Preparation for a destiny far beyond her control. She was being groomed to not only rule Scotland, but to stand at the center of a power struggle that would engulf all of Europe. In 1558, at just 16 years old, Mary married the Dauphin Francis. For a moment, it seemed like a fairy tale. The young princess became the Queen of France. She was radiant, beloved, and powerful. But fairy tales do not last. Barely a year later, Francis too died from an ear infection. Mary, now just 17, was widowed and alone in a foreign land. The glamorous French court that once adored her now turned cold. She was no longer useful. And so, with a heavy heart, Mary sailed back to Scotland. A land she had not seen since childhood. A land that was waiting, not with open arms, but with suspicion, rebellion, and danger. In 1561, a ship cut through the misty waters of the North Sea. On board stood a young woman in mourning black. She was 18 years old, a widow, and a queen returning to a land she barely remembered. This was Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, returning to reclaim her throne. But the Scotland she came back to was not the Scotland she had left as a child. The land was torn between Catholicism and the rising tide of Protestantism. Powerful lords schemed for control, while the fiery preacher John Knox thundered from the pulpit against Mary, calling her that Jezebel sent by the devil. Mary's arrival was not a homecoming. It was a gamble. She was elegant, refined by years in the French court, too French for many Scots, too Catholic for Protestant reformers, and far too ambitious for England's Queen Elizabeth. Mary's very existence was a threat to Elizabeth I. Why? Because many Catholics considered Elizabeth illegitimate and believed Mary Stuart was the rightful Queen of England. Every smile Mary gave, every alliance she forged, every letter she wrote was scrutinized by Elizabeth across the border. And though the two queens never met in person, their rivalry became one of the most legendary duels in history. But Mary was playing a dangerous game. She wasn't just a queen. She was a young woman, yearning for love, longing for stability. And it was this search for love that would begin her ruin. In 1565, Mary shocked Scotland by marrying her cousin, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. At first, it seemed perfect. Darnley was handsome, tall, and charming. Together, they looked like the golden couple Scotland needed. But the fairy tale crumbled fast. Darnley was arrogant, drunken, and dangerously jealous. He resented Mary's power and demanded the crown for himself. His paranoia soon turned deadly. In March 1566, during a supper in Edinburgh, Darnley and his men stormed into Mary's chambers and, before her very eyes, stabbed her private secretary, David Rizzio, to death. The blood of her friends stained her gown. Mary, 6 months pregnant, was held at knife point. From that night, Mary's marriage was doomed. And Scotland whispered, had their queen chosen a husband who would destroy her? But fate was not done twisting the knife. In February 1567, an explosion ripped through Kirk-o-Field, the house where Darnley was staying. His body was found in the garden, strangled, not burned. The murder shocked Europe, and suspicion pointed directly to one man, James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell. Whispers spread that Mary herself had conspired with Bothwell to kill her husband. And then, just weeks later, Mary stunned her subjects again. She married Bothwell. The scandal was too much. Nobles rose in rebellion. They accused Mary of adultery, murder, and betrayal of the crown. At Carberry Hill, her army abandoned her. Mary surrendered, and Bothwell fled into exile. Mary was imprisoned in Loch Leven Castle. The once radiant queen was now a captive, her crown stolen. In 1567, she was forced to abdicate in favor of her infant son, James VI. From Queen of Two Kingdoms to prisoner in a fortress. Mary's downfall was swift, brutal, and complete, but Mary Stuart was not finished yet. For even in chains, she dreamed of freedom. And beyond Scotland's border, in England, Elizabeth watched carefully. Because Mary was about to become her problem. Prison walls have crushed many queens. But Mary Stuart was not made for silence nor chains. And in the spring of 1568 she seized her chance. From the stone walls of Loch Leven Castle, Mary plotted. Disguises were prepared, allies bribed. One moonless night, dressed as a washerwoman, she slipped past her captors, boarded a waiting boat, and sailed across the loch to freedom. For a moment, Scotland seemed hers again. Loyal nobles rallied to her side. Armies clashed at Langside. But fate was cruel. Her forces were crushed, and Mary was forced to flee. She turned south, riding hard for the border, into England, to the court of her cousin, Queen Elizabeth. Mary expected sanctuary. She imagined Elizabeth would welcome her as a fellow queen, a fellow woman, a fellow monarch in a man's world. But she had made a fatal mistake. Elizabeth did not see a refugee. She saw a rival, a Catholic claimant to her throne, a figure around whom her enemies could rally. Instead of safety, Mary found herself in gilded chains. Elizabeth kept her far from London, moving her from castle to castle, manor to manor, under honorable custody. But make no mistake, Mary was a prisoner. For 19 years, Mary lived in confinement. She hunted with falcons, rode horses, and kept her servants. But every letter was watched, every visitor monitored, every move restricted. A queen without power, trapped in a foreign land, dreaming of escape. Her very presence in England was a spark waiting to ignite rebellion. Catholics whispered her name in secret. Plots rose like smoke. Conspiracies to free her, assassinate Elizabeth, and place Mary on the English throne. Elizabeth's ministers debated. What should be done with her? Could a queen kill another queen? In 1586, the question was answered. Anthony Babington, a young Catholic, wrote letters to Mary, plotting Elizabeth's assassination. Mary, desperate and reckless, responded. Her letter was intercepted. Her secret seal was broken. And Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, had the evidence he needed. For the first time, Mary's own words condemned her. She had not wielded the dagger, but she had welcomed the thought. In October 1586, Mary was brought to trial at Fotheringhay Castle. She stood proud, regal, refusing to admit guilt. She argued, "I am a queen, not subject to your laws. How can you judge me?" But the verdict was already written. Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, was sentenced to death. It was February 8, 1587. The dawn broke cold over the grey walls of Fotheringhay Castle. Inside, a queen prepared to die. Mary had spent 19 years in captivity. Now, at the age of 44, her final hours had come. The night before her death, she wrote farewell letters, to her family in France, to her allies abroad. Her words were steady, filled not with fear, but with a queen's pride. She dressed carefully, choosing a gown of black velvet, the color of mourning. But underneath she wore scarlet red, the color of martyrdom, a silent statement that she would die as a Catholic martyr, defiant against Protestant England. The walk to the scaffold. That morning, Mary was led into the great hall. Hundreds of eyes watched as she entered, her head held high, her crucifix in hand. She was calm, almost regal, as if walking not to her death, but to her coronation. She looked at the crowd and declared, "I am the Queen of Scotland, true heir of England, and I die in the Catholic faith." Even her enemies felt the weight of her words. She knelt, whispering prayers in Latin. Her ladies wept, but Mary silenced them with a gesture. The executioner stepped forward. He begged her forgiveness. Mary nodded. "I forgive you with all my heart. For now, I hope you will make an end of me quickly." The striking of the blow. The crowd fell silent. The axe rose and fell. The first strike missed the mark, slashing her neck but not severing it. A groan rippled through the hall. The second blow struck deeper, but still, her head clung. Finally, with a third strike, it was done. The executioner lifted her head high, declaring, "God save Queen Elizabeth." But as he held it aloft, the auburn wig slipped away, Mary's head tumbled, leaving only grey hair in his hands. Gasps filled the room. Even in death, Mary defied expectation. Her little dog, hidden beneath her skirts, rushed onto the scaffold, refusing to leave her blood-stained body. News of her execution thundered across Europe. To Catholics, Mary was a martyr. To Elizabeth, it was a necessary evil. But Elizabeth herself was shaken. She claimed she never signed the death warrant, that it had been done without her will. Whether true or not, history remembers this. One queen had killed another. Though her body was silenced, her bloodline was not. And in that, Mary had the last word. When word of Mary's execution spread, Europe trembled. In Catholic Spain, King Philip II raged, declaring Elizabeth a tyrant. The Pope condemned England. Priests preached of Mary's martyrdom, and whispers of revenge filled the courts of Europe. But in Scotland, her young son James, raised Protestant, reacted with calculation, not grief. He condemned his mother's death publicly, but privately, he kept his eyes on a greater prize, the throne of England. Mary's death created something Elizabeth could never undo, a legend. In death, Mary was no longer a captive queen, no longer a prisoner of scandal. She was a martyr, a romantic figure, a tragic heroine. Poets wrote of her beauty, her grace, her suffering. Painters captured her final moments as if she were a saint. And Catholics across Europe called her Mary, the Queen of Hearts. James VI, the son who inherited two thrones. In 1603, 16 years after Mary's death, Elizabeth I died childless. The English crown passed to none other than Mary's son, James VI of Scotland. He became James I of England, uniting the crowns of Scotland and England under one monarch. This was Mary's ultimate victory. The very queen who had ordered her execution had, in the end, paved the way for Mary's bloodline to rule. It was Mary's descendants who would sit on the English throne for centuries to come, shaping Britain's destiny. Mary's story is one of contradictions, beauty and betrayal, ambition and downfall, loyalty and treachery. She was a queen crowned in infancy, a prisoner for nearly 2 decades, and a martyr in death. To some, she was reckless, ruled by passion, and blind to politics. To others, she was a woman trapped in a brutal age, punished for being both powerful and vulnerable. But one truth remains undeniable: Mary, Queen of Scots, lived and died as a queen. Her bloodline triumphed, her memory endured, and her life became a legend that still haunts history. And so ends the tale of Mary, Queen of Scots. A queen who was born to rule, betrayed by those she trusted, and executed by her own kin. Yet in death, she claimed her greatest victory. For thrones crumble, crowns tarnish, but legends never die. Asterisk.